For years, Susan thought the smartest grocery shopper was the person who could walk out of a supermarket with the fullest cart for the lowest price. She compared unit prices, searched for family-size packages, watched for buy-one-get-one deals, and stocked the refrigerator as though another grocery trip within 7 days would represent some kind of failure. If a package was larger and cheaper per ounce, it usually went into the cart. If 2 containers cost only a little more than 1, she bought 2. If the produce section offered a bag instead of individual pieces, the bag felt like the obvious bargain. On Sunday afternoon, the refrigerator looked impressive. By Thursday, it looked different. Lettuce was beginning to collapse in the vegetable drawer. Half a package of mushrooms had darkened. Yogurt had been pushed behind a carton of orange juice. A family-sized tray of meat remained unopened because the dinner planned for Tuesday never happened. There was still plenty of food in the house, but somehow Susan was already thinking about another grocery trip. She had always assumed the problem was rising supermarket prices. Then she began paying attention to a very different way of shopping, one reflected in Japanese food loss guidance and in the routines of many careful households. The goal was not simply to pay less at the register. It was to make sure the food that entered the cart had a realistic path to the table. That distinction would eventually change almost everything about Susan's weekly shopping trip. The first change took less than 2 minutes. Before leaving for the supermarket, Susan opened the refrigerator. Not the quick glance she usually made while asking whether there was milk. She actually looked. She moved a container. She opened the vegetable drawer. She checked the freezer. Then she looked inside the pantry. There were 6 eggs, although eggs were already on her list. 2 onions were hiding in a basket. She had enough rice for several weeks. A package of chicken was frozen beneath a bag of vegetables. Half a cabbage needed to be used soon. Susan removed 5 things from the shopping list before reaching the car. It felt almost ridiculous. She had spent years looking for digital coupons that might save 50 cents, while occasionally buying an entire second package of something she already owned. Japanese food loss guidance encourages shoppers to check what is already in the refrigerator or pantry before going to the store, and Susan quickly understood why. A duplicate purchase does not become cheap because it was on sale. The money has still left the bank account, and now the household has twice as much food to finish. The next week, she went one step further and took a quick photo of the refrigerator before leaving. Standing in the supermarket wondering whether there were carrots at home, she did not have to guess. The answer was already in her phone. For the first time, her grocery list began with inventory instead of imagination. That changed the way she planned meals. Susan used to decide what sounded good for the coming week and then buy everything required to make those meals. Now she looked at what needed to be used first and allowed those foods to influence the menu. The half cabbage already at home could become part of Monday's dinner. Mushrooms that would not last forever could be used Tuesday. The chicken in the freezer could handle Wednesday. Suddenly, 3 meals had partially planned themselves before Susan spent another $1. This was a subtle reversal, but it mattered. The old system started with 7 empty dinner slots and asked the supermarket to fill them. The new system started with food the household already owned and asked how many of those dinner slots could be filled without buying from zero. Once Susan began shopping that way, the list shortened naturally. She also became less attached to the idea that a shopping list had to contain every ingredient for 7 perfectly predicted days. Life did not cooperate with perfect plans. Her husband might work late. Their daughter might eat with friends. Someone might decide they did not want the elaborate dinner planned 5 days earlier. So Susan began buying fresh food for the part of the week she could reasonably predict and keeping flexible staples for everything else. A smaller fresh food inventory looked less impressive when the refrigerator door opened. It also produced far fewer unpleasant surprises at the end of the week. The next lesson challenged one of Susan's strongest supermarket beliefs: bigger is better. She had been trained by years of unit price comparisons to see the larger package as the financially responsible choice. Sometimes it absolutely was. The family ate rice regularly, used certain frozen foods reliably, and went through basic pantry staples without difficulty. But fresh food behaved differently. One Saturday, Susan stood in front of 2 packages of spinach. The larger bag cost less per ounce. Her hand automatically moved toward it. Then she remembered the previous week when nearly a third of an identical bag had turned wet and dark before anyone ate it. The cheaper price per ounce had not prevented those uneaten ounces from costing money, so she chose the smaller bag. At checkout, it looked like the more expensive choice. By the end of the week, every leaf had been eaten. Susan began distinguishing between purchase efficiency and consumption efficiency. The supermarket could tell her the cost per pound, per ounce, or per serving printed on a package. It could not tell her how much her family would actually finish. That calculation belonged to the household. From then on, bulk buying had to pass a second test. Not, is this cheaper, but will this family realistically use all of it? The surprising answer was sometimes no. Once Susan stopped chasing quantity automatically, she noticed another behavior inside the refrigerated aisles. She had always reached toward the back of the shelf. The carton behind the front carton often had a later date, and the later date felt like free value. Why would anyone intentionally choose the package with less time remaining? Then she encountered the Japanese idea often called temedori, choosing an item from the front when it will be consumed soon, instead of automatically reaching for the longest possible remaining shelf life. Susan initially thought this was mainly an environmental gesture, something designed to help stores reduce food waste. It was, but there was also a useful discipline hidden inside the habit. It forced the shopper to connect the product with an actual plan. If Susan was buying tofu for dinner that evening, why did she need the package designed to sit in her refrigerator much longer? If yogurt would be eaten tomorrow morning, why dig through the shelf to find one with several additional days? Did not start buying products she could not safely consume. And she still checked labels carefully. But the automatic search for the newest package disappeared when the extra time had no practical value. Her supermarket choices became linked to when the food would actually be eaten. That made the printed dates themselves more important. Susan had spent years treating nearly every date on food as though it meant the same thing. A date approached and anxiety increased. A date passed, and the product felt suspicious. But best before and used by style dates served different purposes. Learning that distinction changed her behavior without making her careless. Foods requiring strict safety attention still received it. Storage instructions still mattered. Opened foods were treated differently from unopened ones. What disappeared was the reflex of treating every quality-related date as an automatic order to throw something away. Susan began buying with dates in mind, rather than simply fearing them afterward. If an item would be eaten immediately, a shorter remaining period could be perfectly suitable. If it needed to stay in the refrigerator for several days, she planned differently. This sounds like a small technical detail. But it changed the shopping trip because she was no longer asking only which package lasts longest. She was asking which package lasts long enough for what this household actually plans to do with it. Those questions produced very different carts. Then Susan discovered the discount section. She had always considered marked-down food risky for another reason. A yellow sticker could create its own form of impulse buying. 50% off sounded irresistible, even if the product had never been on the shopping list. A shopper could save $5 on something she had no intention of buying and still be $5 poorer. So Susan created a rule. Discounted food was useful only when it replaced something already planned or could be incorporated into a meal immediately. One evening, chicken intended for dinner was marked down because the store wanted to sell it quickly. That made sense. Another day, a discounted dessert looked tempting but had no purpose beyond the excitement of the sticker. She left it. The important skill was not learning to chase markdowns. It was learning to separate a lower price from genuine savings. The same principle applied to coupons, loyalty offers, and multi-buy promotions. Buy two and save sounded financially intelligent until Susan asked whether she actually needed two. A deal that increases the total amount spent is not automatically a saving. Sometimes the least expensive response to a promotion is walking past it. That realization changed the physical way Susan moved through the supermarket. In the past, she had allowed the store to remind her what existed. She entered the produce section and suddenly remembered berries. She passed the bakery and decided bread would be useful. She saw snacks and wondered whether the family needed more. The supermarket was effectively writing part of her shopping list after she arrived. Now her list was built around meals and actual household shortages. She still allowed some flexibility when prices or quality made a substitution sensible, but she stopped treating every attractive display as information about what the household needed. This became especially obvious near the entrance and checkout, where convenience could masquerade as necessity. A small item added almost nothing to the psychological weight of a full cart. $5 disappeared quietly because the overall grocery bill was already large. Susan began asking a brutal little question. If this product were the only reason she had driven to the supermarket, would she still buy it? Often the answer was no. Back on the shelf it went. but being too rigid could also cost money. Susan learned that when a planned vegetable suddenly became expensive, in the past, a recipe dictated the shopping trip. If the recipe called for asparagus, asparagus entered the cart even when another vegetable looked better and cost less. Her new approach treated the menu as flexible. If cabbage, carrots, mushrooms, squash, or another ingredient could perform the same basic role in the meal, the household was allowed to change course. Japanese food culture often gives strong attention to seasonality, but Susan did not need to recreate Japanese dishes to benefit from the basic logic of letting availability influence the menu. The goal was not to choose the cheapest item regardless of quality. It was to stop paying a premium merely because a recipe written days earlier had mentioned a specific vegetable. Once meals became flexible, price changes lost some of their power. The store could raise the price of one item. It could not force Susan to buy it. She also became suspicious of ingredients that had only one future. A special herb for one recipe, a sauce used once every 3 months, a vegetable nobody liked except in one particular dish. The item might cost only a few dollars, but half of it often remained after the planned meal. Susan began asking where an ingredient would go next. Green onions could finish one dinner, move into eggs the next morning, and appear in noodles later. Mushrooms could join pasta, rice, soup, or an omelet. Cabbage could survive several completely different meals. The best supermarket ingredients were not necessarily the cheapest ones on the shelf. They were the ones with several possible destinations after reaching the kitchen. This flexibility became particularly useful when plans changed. If Tuesday's dinner disappeared, a versatile ingredient could move to Wednesday without becoming waste. A highly specialized ingredient simply waited for the exact recipe that might never return. The cart itself began getting smaller. Susan used to choose a large cart automatically, even for moderate shopping trips. Empty space had a strange psychological effect. A few products resting at the bottom made the trip feel unfinished. A basket or smaller cart changed that sensation. She could see the volume accumulating. This was not a rule she believed every Japanese shopper followed, nor was it some magical cultural secret. It was simply consistent with the broader lesson she had started borrowing from smaller, more deliberate shopping patterns. Capacity influences behavior. When Susan expected to buy 8 things, she chose a basket. The basket became physically heavier as unplanned items accumulated. That inconvenience was useful. The large cart had made 10 additional purchases almost invisible. The basket made them impossible to ignore. Sometimes good shopping required making excess slightly less convenient. Another shift happened in the produce section. Susan had been attracted to visual perfection: the biggest apple, the smoothest pepper, the most symmetrical tomato. But appearance did not always determine usefulness. A vegetable intended for soup did not need to win a beauty contest. A slightly unusual shape could still be perfectly suitable if quality was otherwise good. She also became more careful about prepackaged quantities. A large bag of fruit could offer a better unit price, but individual pieces gave her control over quantity. 5 apples the family would finish could be cheaper than 12 apples sold at a lower price per pound if several of the 12 eventually went uneaten. Again, the lesson returned to the same uncomfortable truth. The register calculates what leaves the store while the household budget is ultimately affected by what gets consumed. By now, Susan's shopping trips looked less impressive. The cart was not as full. She sometimes purchased smaller packages. She occasionally chose the product near the front instead of searching for the newest one behind it. She walked past promotions that would once have felt too good to miss. Yet the weekly grocery routine was becoming calmer. There was less food to manage after she returned home. And that revealed another supermarket habit she had previously ignored. Before buying something, she needed to know where it would go. A frozen food promotion was not a bargain if the freezer was already full. A huge tray of meat did not help if there was no time to divide and store it that evening. A delicate vegetable was a poor purchase if several similar foods already needed to be eaten first. Storage capacity became part of the shopping decision rather than a problem to solve after checkout. This was especially important with fresh food. Susan used to buy aspirational groceries. A week of healthy intentions might produce spinach, kale, berries, herbs, several vegetables, yogurt, and fresh fish all at once. The cart represented the family she hoped everyone would become by Monday morning. But aspiration has a shelf life. People got busy. Someone ate lunch at work. Another person wanted something different. The healthiest food in the supermarket provided no benefit after it became waste. Susan stopped shopping for the ideal week and started shopping for the probable week. If the household reliably ate 3 kinds of vegetables, she bought those first. New ingredients were introduced in manageable amounts rather than turning the refrigerator into a test of discipline. The goal was not to reduce variety forever. It was to make experimentation cheap enough to fail without filling the trash. Near the end of each trip, Susan began performing one final check before entering the checkout line. She looked into the cart and mentally assigned the most perishable foods to actual meals. What night was the fish for? When would the spinach be used? Who would eat the yogurt? Was there enough time to finish the berries? Could part of the meat be frozen immediately? If an item had no answer, she reconsidered it. This was perhaps the biggest change of all. Previously, the supermarket trip ended when an item entered the cart. Now entering the cart was only the beginning of its plan. Every fresh product needed an exit route from the household, preferably through a meal rather than through the trash. Several months later, Susan realized she still used almost all of the supermarket skills she had learned before. She compared prices, she watched promotions, she bought in bulk when the family genuinely consumed the product. She took advantage of discounts when they matched the plan. None of those techniques had been wrong. They had simply been incomplete. The Japanese habits and food loss ideas she had explored added a second half to the calculation. Check what is already at home. Buy only what can realistically be used. Connect shelf life to the actual eating schedule. Choose food according to purpose instead of automatically hunting for the newest package. Let prices and availability adjust the menu. Favor ingredients with several possible uses. Do not let a discount create a purchase that would never have existed otherwise. Know the limits of the refrigerator and freezer before filling them. The result was not a dramatic television-style transformation. Susan did not cut the grocery bill in half overnight. She did not become a perfect zero-waste shopper. Some lettuce still occasionally went bad. A forgotten container still appeared in the back of the refrigerator. The family still ordered takeout on nights when cooking simply was not going to happen. But the waste became less automatic. The difference appeared in dozens of quiet moments. Eggs removed from the shopping list because 6 were already home, a smaller bag of spinach completely eaten, a discounted package purchased because it already had a destination, a tempting multi-buy ignored because one was enough, a vegetable substituted because the original choice was unnecessarily expensive, a product taken from the front because it would be eaten that evening, a specialized ingredient left on the shelf because nobody could answer what would happen to the rest of it. And that led Susan to a conclusion she had never heard from a supermarket advertisement. The smartest grocery shopper may not be the person who brings home the most food for the least money. It may be the person who brings home the right amount of food and then actually uses it. A full cart can feel like abundance. A giant refrigerator can feel like security. A pantry packed with backups can feel responsible. Sometimes all 3 are useful, but sometimes they simply make waste harder to see. Smaller Japanese kitchens and food loss practices offer Americans a different lens. Inventory matters, timing matters, quantity matters, and the final destination of the food matters. The supermarket encourages shoppers to think about the moment of purchase. The household budget has to think further ahead. What will happen to this tomorrow? What about 3 days from now? Is there already one at home? Does the family need the larger package? Will the discount create savings or simply create more food? Does this ingredient have another use? If the answer to those questions becomes part of the shopping trip, the entire cart begins to change. Susan still enjoys finding a bargain. She still feels a small victory when something she planned to buy is on sale, but she no longer measures success by how many discount labels appear on the receipt. She measures it several days later when she opens the refrigerator. The vegetables are moving. The leftovers are visible. The freezer has room. The food she bought has somewhere to go. And very little of Sunday's great deal is waiting to become Friday's trash. That is when the savings become real. Because the best supermarket habit may have nothing to do with finding the cheapest food. It is learning to stop buying food that will never become a meal.